The coffee cart glided across the glass lobby, white shirt, brimmed cap, the scent of fresh ground Arabica. I didn't bother looking up. I was finalizing slides for the 9 a.m. board meeting. He set the cup down, leaning in close. For you, Kiki. Kiki, a name only one person ever called me. My head snapped up. The barista was my grandfather, and he was here, inside my stepmother's corporate fortress, to see it all. My name is Kira Lowell. I'm 29, and this morning, I was a coiled spring. The lobby of Northbridge Capital Systems is designed to make you feel small. It's a canyon of polished black stone and structural glass, soaring 40 feet to a ceiling that reflects the frantic, silent ballet of Grayford's financial district. Outside, a miserable Monday rain was misting the streets, blurring the taxis into streaks of yellow. Inside, the only sounds were the hushed click of expensive heels and the whisper of the ventilation system, circulating air that smelled of nothing at all. I was huddled over my laptop at one of the brutally minimalist steel tables, trying to ignore the tremor in my fingers. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of a nearby info pillar. Pale face, dark hair pulled back into a severe knot, eyes scanning the final draft of a PowerPoint slide that could either save the company or end my career. 9 a.m., the board meeting, the Helixport M&A. It was a garbage deal, gift-wrapped in synergy-laced jargon. A deal my stepmother, Sloan, the company's COO, was ramming through with suspicious velocity. I was just a senior risk analyst, but I was the one who'd worked nights and weekends, pulling the threads on the due diligence until I found the rot underneath. Obfuscated liabilities, shell entities in jurisdictions that didn't ask questions, a data trail that had been deliberately, almost surgically, corrupted. And I was the one who had to present this to a board that answered, ultimately, to her. My coffee, purchased an hour ago from the artisan shop across the street, was cold. I barely noticed. I was rehearsing the opening line, trying to project an authority I didn't feel, when a new sound broke my focus. The soft, rubbery squeak of cartwheels on the stone. I glanced up, annoyed. A new building amenity, apparently a mobile coffee cart, the kind you see in hospitals or second-tier hotels, was making its way across the atrium. A man in a standard-issue white polo shirt and a dark gray baseball cap pushed it, his head down. He looked like 1,000 other service workers in this city, invisible by design. I dismissed him instantly and looked back at my screen. Slide 4. Liquidity risk exposure. That's where they'll interrupt. Be ready. The cart stopped. I didn't look up, but my senses registered the proximity. The sudden, rich, invasive smell of fresh ground Arabica, dark and smoky, cutting through the sterile air. It was a smell of genuine quality, oddly out of place for a generic cart. A white ceramic cup was placed on the steel table beside my laptop. It landed with a soft, definitive clink. I was about to say I hadn't ordered anything, my eyes still glued to a particularly damning timestamp, when the man leaned in. He didn't lean like a barista asking if I wanted room for cream. He leaned in conspiratorially, his head angled just so, bringing his mouth close to my ear. A low, raspy whisper, a voice I hadn't heard in 6 weeks. For you, Kiki. The world stopped. It wasn't just the sound, it was the name, Kiki, a relic, a fossil embedded in the amber of my childhood, a name no one on this continent had used since my father died. Save one. The name belonged to picnics on a sprawling lawn in the Hamptons, to sailing lessons on the Sound, to a time before Northbridge was a battlefield. My heart didn't just beat, it kicked, a violent spasm against my ribs. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt lightheaded. I lifted my head, slowly, every vertebra locking in protest. He was already straightening up, turning back to his cart as if adjusting the sugar packets, but I saw him. The baseball cap was pulled low, shadowing his face. He'd shaved. The familiar, aristocratic silver stubble was gone, replaced by a slightly chafed, clean-shaven jaw. He wore a pair of thin, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind you buy at a drugstore. not the heavy, bespoke tortoiseshell frames that were his signature. The disguise was simple, it was cheap, and it was terrifyingly effective. Because beneath the generic uniform, beneath the shave and the $20 glasses, the eyes that met mine for a fraction of a second were not those of a service worker. They were the eyes of August Lowell, my grandfather, the patriarch, the founder, the man who owned the very stone we were standing on. My mouth went dry. I couldn't form a word. I stared, frozen, my multi-million-dollar risk analysis completely forgotten. August, my grandfather, who hadn't taken my calls in a month, who had cut off my personal stipend as if I were a delinquent teenager, was standing 10 feet away from me, disguised as a barista, in the lobby of the company he built. He fiddled with a napkin dispenser, his back mostly to me. Then, he glanced over his shoulder, a micro-movement no one else would ever catch. He gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible wink. It wasn't a greeting, it was a command. Don't react. Not one word, not one look. He turned his cart and began pushing it toward a cluster of junior executives near the elevator bank. His movements practiced and smooth. He looked, for all the world, like a man who had been pushing a coffee cart his entire life, deferential, invisible. My gaze snapped back to the cup he'd left. It was steaming. The smell was overwhelming. I looked around the lobby, my pulse hammering in my throat. Had anyone seen? No one was looking at me. A VP was yelling into his phone by the glass doors. 2 associates were laughing, their heads bent together. They saw nothing but a man serving coffee. I tried to breathe. It didn't work. My lungs felt like they were shrinking. He's not here to visit. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some eccentric billionaire's prank. This wasn't a grandfather checking in on his granddaughter moment. This was strategy. This was reconnaissance. He was observing. He was in costume, on the ground, in the heart of the fortress. He was watching the board members arrive. He was listening to the idle chatter of the executives. He was gathering data in a way no one else could, precisely because no one saw him. They saw the uniform, the cart, the function. They didn't see the man. I stared at the coffee. I smelled the dark, bitter roast, and beneath it, I smelled something else. It was the sharp, metallic odor of a meticulously laid plan, the same scent that hung in the air just before my father would announce a hostile takeover, the smell of a game already in motion. My hands were shaking, not from nerves about the presentation anymore, but from a profound and sudden shift in reality. I had spent the last 2 weeks thinking I was the protagonist of this drama. I was the lone analyst, the whistleblower, Kira Lowell, fighting for the soul of her father's company against her ambitious stepmother. I thought today was my move. I thought I was walking into that 9 a.m. meeting to set a fire. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. I wasn't the one setting the fire. I was just the kindling. I had no idea what the real play was. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the players. And I didn't know the objective. For the first time, looking at the innocent white cup left by a man disguised as a ghost, I suspected I wasn't running today's game at all. I was being played. I sat frozen, my entire nervous system screaming, long after August Lowell's coffee cart had disappeared toward the main elevator bank. The cup he left was a piece of evidence, a beacon, a bomb, my hand. When I finally reached for it, was perfectly steady. The tremor was gone, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. Northbridge Capital Systems is my family's name, etched into the granite facade outside. It's our empire, but it's not my kingdom. My inheritance, after my father passed, was a mid-level management position and a front-row seat to watch his widow dismantle his legacy. I am the senior risk analyst, a glorified auditor with a legacy surname, walled off from real power by 3 layers of executive vice presidents who all report to one person. Sloan Mercer, my stepmother, the chief operating officer. Sloan is a masterpiece of corporate architecture. She's 45 but looks a decade younger, thanks to disciplined starvation, tactical cosmetic procedures, and an aura of absolute control. She favors minimalist, brutally expensive sheath dresses in shades of gray, graphite, charcoal, slate. Her blonde hair is never loose. It's always pulled into a chignon so tight it looks painful. And she wears bracelets, always. Thick, heavy, stacked cuffs of brushed silver or rhodium, one on each wrist. They make a dry metallic clack, clack, clack when she walks, a sound that has become synonymous with her arrival, the sound of someone being measured and found wanting. I've always thought they looked less like jewelry and more like a high-fashion, weaponized version of handcuffs. She married my father when I was in college, a brilliant strategist. She was his COO long before she was his wife. He admired her mind, her ambition, her ruthlessness. He thought it complemented his vision. He didn't realize, until it was too late, that her vision was singular, and it only had room for her. When he died last year, a sudden, shocking arrhythmia on his private tennis court, it left a vacuum. His will was complex, his controlling shares, the real power, were placed in a temporary trust, managed by the board, pending a full review on the anniversary of his death, which is 3 weeks from now. Sloane doesn't have control, not yet. She's the COO, powerful and feared, but she needs the board. She needs a victory, a big one. She needs to prove that her leadership is not just competent, but visionary. Enter the Helixport deal. On the surface, it was perfect. A $10 billion acquisition of a logistics and data port company. It was the synergy darling of the financial news. But the whispers started almost immediately. Whispers I heard by the analyst pods. Whispers in the executive washroom. The numbers didn't just add up. They were too perfect. The rumor was that one of Sloane's pet projects, an off-balance sheet fund she'd been using for high-risk ventures, had blown up, a massive 9-figure hole that she needed to plug before the trust review. Helixport wasn't an acquisition. It was a lifeboat, bought with Northbridge money to hide her private shipwreck. Because I'm a Lowell, my security clearance is higher than my pay grade. I have access to data trails others don't. So, I started digging. I worked from my home apartment, not the office network. I worked at 3 a.m. I found it. Not just the hole, but the cover-up. The Helixport deal was a Trojan horse. Buried in the derivatives contracts attached to the acquisition were liquidity-trapping covenants, obscure clauses that, once triggered, would divert billions in Northbridge assets to cover Helixport's, and by extension, Sloane's, hidden debts. It was brilliant, it was subtle, and it was deeply, profoundly illegal. The worst part? The digital signatures. I pulled the metadata on the approval documents. The CFO's signature was timestamped at 2:17 a.m. on a Sunday. The head of legals was authorized from an IP address that traced back to a server in Eastern Europe. They weren't just compliant, they were complicit, or they were being framed. I did what I was trained to do. I wrote a report, a clean, precise, 20-page analysis of the financial and legal exposure. I attached the corrupted signature logs. I marked the email, critical, urgent risk analysis, and sent it to the chairman of the board, the head of audit, and the CFO. The response was silence, a vacuum. My email wasn't just ignored. It felt like it had never existed. Then the soft block began. My calendar, which I live by, became a weapon against me. The 9 a.m. board meeting, originally scheduled for next Monday, was suddenly moved up to today, citing urgent market opportunities. My own one-on-one meetings with the audit chair were canceled, his assistant citing an unavoidable family matter. They were isolating me, trying to run out the clock. They were scheduling the vote before I could build consensus, before I could make my case. They were pushing me into presenting my findings cold, in front of Sloane herself, where she could shred me. I knew the digital world was compromised. Sloane owned the servers. So, 2 days ago, I went analog. I printed a single hard copy of my full analysis. I put it in a sealed black folder, labeled Internal Review Only. I planned to slip it to one of the older, independent directors, a man who had been my father's friend. I left my desk to get a cup of coffee. I was gone for maybe 10 minutes. When I came back, the black folder was gone. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just that they were watching my emails. They were watching my desk. I was completely, totally alone. And I was furious, because the one person who should have had my back, the one person with the power to stop this with a single phone call, was ignoring me. August. A month ago, my personal stipend, a generous allowance from a trust he managed, separate from the company, stopped. No warning, no explanation, just a notification from the bank of a failed transfer. I called him. I left messages. I sent texts. I even showed up at his penthouse, only to be politely, firmly turned away by his staff. Mr. Lowell is not available. I thought he was washing his hands of me. I thought, in the cold calculus of the Lowell dynasty, he had looked at the board, looked at Sloan, and looked at me, and decided I was the losing bet. He was cutting his losses. He was disfavoring me, leaving me to be devoured. It stung. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than Sloane's ambition. My father was gone. Now my grandfather was, too. It lit a fire in me. Fine. If I was going to be disowned, I would go down swinging. I would burn the Helixport deal to the ground and take Sloan with me, even if it cost me my job, my name. I picked up the cup he'd left me. It was hot, heavy, real. I stared at the steam rising from the porcelain. He hadn't cut me off. He'd cut me loose. It wasn't a punishment. It was a test. He'd taken away my financial safety net, my family connection, his support. He wasn't testing my loyalty. He was testing my competence. He was testing my spine. He wanted to see what I would do when I was truly cornered. Would I fold? Would I run? Or would I do exactly what I had done? Dig deeper, fight harder, and prepare to go to war alone? My God, he wasn't here to save me. He was here, disguised as a barista, pushing a cart of cheap coffee and high-grade surveillance equipment, to watch the show, to see who else touched the truth, to see whose hands were dirty, and to see, finally, if I was worthy of the name he'd given me. I took a sip of the coffee. It was black, bitter, and scalding hot. It tasted like a declaration of war. The elevator chimed. The first of the board members was arriving. Showtime. I watched my grandfather work the lobby. It was a performance of calculated invisibility. He pushed the cart with a slight, believable hunch, never making eye contact for more than a second, projecting a perfect blend of service industry deference and weary resignation. He wiped down his stainless steel counter, refilled the napkin dispensers, and arranged cups with a meticulousness that was both part of the disguise and pure undiluted August Lowell. He drifted toward the main elevator bank, the hub where the senior executives and board members would congregate before ascending to the 40th floor boardroom. As he moved, I noticed the earpiece. It was tiny, a flesh-colored bud tucked deep in his right ear, looking exactly like a high-end hearing aid. Of course, he wasn't just listening with his own ears. He was broadcasting. Someone, somewhere, his personal security, his legal team, was hearing every word. Then I saw the cane. It was leaning against the side of the cart, secured by a simple clip. My breath hitched. It was his, the famous, familiar cane. Not the ornate silver-headed one he used for galas, but his everyday companion, a single, smooth length of dark, polished walnut, custom-made. It was an extension of his will. But something was wrong. The base, which I knew ended in a discreetly elegant brass tip, was different. It was capped with a thick, ugly black rubber ferrule, the kind you'd see on a standard-issue hospital crutch. It was a jarring, functional detail, completely at odds with the cane's quality. It was, I realized, the most important part of his disguise. He was using it. As he paused near a seating area, he'd pick it up, lean on it, and the rubber tip would meet the polished stone floor. A soft thump, then he'd move, and it would thump again. He wasn't leaning for support. My mind, trained in analysis, pieced it together instantly. The earpiece was the receiver. The cane was the transmitter. The ugly rubber tip wasn't rubber at all. Or if it was, it housed a highly sensitive, shock-proof directional microphone. He was pointing it, and every thump, it wasn't a sound of walking, it was a digital marker. He was tapping the floor to create timestamps in the audio log, isolating specific conversations, marking them for his legal team. Listen here. Listen now. The main doors hissed open, admitting a gust of rain and two of the board's heavyweights, Marcus Thorne, the chairman, and Bill Jensen, the CFO. Jensen was the one whose digital signature I'd found on the 2:17 a.m. file. They were laughing about something, shaking the rain from their $1,000 coats. "Sloan really pulled this one out of the fire," Jensen said, his voice a low, self-congratulatory boom that bounced off the stone. "The numbers are pristine." "Pristine is one word for it," Thorne chuckled, clapping him on the back. "Let's just get the vote done before someone in risk decides to grow a conscience." I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just complicit, they were bragging. August, ever the perfect barista, intercepted them. "Coffee, Mr. Thorne, fresh brewed?" "Ah, excellent," Thorne said, not even looking at him. "Black, Bill?" "Cream, 2 sugars, make it fast. Son, we're late." August's hands were steady as he poured. He didn't flinch at being called son by a man 20 years his junior. He was invisible. He was a piece of furniture, and his cane was resting on the floor. The tip angled perfectly toward them. Thump, a timestamp. As August fumbled by accident with the sugar packets, buying himself another 10 seconds, a third man joined them. Doyle, the head of legal. "Morning," Doyle said, his voice clipped. He looked nervous. "Bill, did Sloan get the final lock on 41? Jensen waved a dismissive hand. "She handled it last night. The black file is secure." My entire body went rigid. Black file. Thorne shot Doyle a warning look. "Not here." "Who's to hear?" Jensen scoffed, gesturing at my grandfather, who was wiping the counter. "This guy? Relax. She's got the hard copies in the catalyst room. Floor 41. Smart. No one goes up there." "And the access logs?" Doyle pressed, his paranoia palpable. "She's having the cameras serviced," Jensen said, his voice dropping slightly, forcing the microphone in the cane to work harder. "A little maintenance glitch. The whole loop from last night is being optimized. By the time this vote goes through, the room will be sterile. Nothing to find. Now, where's my damn coffee?" "Catalyst. Floor 41. Cameras down." August handed Jensen the cup. His face was a perfect mask of bored servitude, but as he turned back to his cart, he gripped his cane. Thump, thump. 2 distinct, deliberate taps on the marble floor. Not a timestamp, a signal. It was for me. My mind raced. Catalyst. Floor 41. Cameras down for maintenance. A lie. They weren't down. They were being erased. But if they were being erased, the system was still live. Sloan was creating a gap, a blind spot. I bent my head over my laptop, my fingers flying. I wasn't looking at my presentation. I was in a secure, anonymous reporting portal for our internal IT department, a backdoor system I'd discovered during a risk audit. I typed a new ticket. Subject: urgent, sync error. Body: camera feed. Floor 41, Catalyst conference room. Feed is showing desynchronization artifacts and timestamp lag. Possible critical failure. Request immediate diagnostic and hard reboot of server feed. Do not shut down. Reboot and resync. It was a gamble. If I just reported it down, they'd log it and ignore it until Sloan's people were finished. But a synchronization error and a timestamp lag? That's a data integrity issue. A 5-alarm fire for any IT admin. They wouldn't just look. They would be forced to trigger a system-wide resync to preserve the existing data before diagnosing the problem. They would, in effect, turn the cameras back on and snapshot the current activity to save the logs. I hit send. The anonymous ticket vanished into the system. Akime, the center elevator, the express to the executive floors, opened its doors. August pushed his card in. He was, ostensibly, going up to serve the pre-meeting. The doors started to slide shut. I made a split-second decision. I gathered my laptop. "Hold the elevator," I called out, breaking into a professional, hurried walk. My grandfather's back was to me. I saw his shoulders tense, but he didn't turn. A junior executive inside the elevator, one I recognized, jabbed the door open button. I slipped in, breathing a little heavily, playing the part of the analyst running late. "Thanks," I mumbled, pressing the button for 40. The doors closed, encasing us in a small, mirrored steel box. It was me, the junior exec, and August Lowell, disguised as a barista. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the elevator and the quiet rattling of ceramic cups on the cart. The junior exec was staring at his phone, oblivious. My grandfather was facing the cart, his back to me. He didn't move. He didn't look at me. The junior exec got off at 35, leaving just the two of us. The elevator began its ascent to 40. We were alone. 10 seconds. 15. The mirrored walls showed me my own pale, tense face. They showed me his back, the cheap white polo stretched over his shoulders. He still didn't turn, but his voice came, low and rough, barely a vibration in the enclosed space. "Don't save their fathers, Kira." I stared at his reflection. His eyes were invisible, hidden by the cap. "What?" I whispered. "Thorne, Jensen, Doyle. They're old names. Their fathers built this city with mine. Your instinct will be to save the family, to protect the legacy. Don't." The elevator hummed. We passed 38. He finally turned his head, just slightly. His profile was sharp, aged, and utterly ruthless. "You found the rot. I saw your report." My heart hammered. The hard copy?" "They're sloppy," he hissed. "They put it in a shred bin, but didn't run the cycle. My cleaning staff is better than their security." He paused. "You were right about the derivatives. You were wrong about the motive. It's not to cover a loss? It's worse. It's not a cover-up. It's a theft. They're not plugging a hole. They're creating one to siphon the assets into Helixport, which Sloan already controls through a proxy I haven't cracked yet. She's not saving Northbridge. She's gutting it." The light for 39 lit up. "Your father," he said, and his voice broke for just a fraction of a second. "He was a good man. He was a terrible judge of character. He trusted them. He trusted her. Don't save his legacy. Save the truth." The elevator began to slow. I finally understood. This wasn't a rescue mission. He wasn't here to protect the family name or the company's reputation. He was here to expose the cancer. He didn't care if the company burned in the process. As long as the lies burned with it, he was handing me the torch. The bell chimed for floor 40. "I'm going to 41, I said, my voice low and steady. "I know," he whispered. The doors opened. "The coffee is served. Kira, make sure they drink it." He pushed his cart out into the plush, silent carpet of the executive floor, heading for the boardroom. I stayed in the elevator, my finger moving from 40 and pressing 41. The doors slid shut. I was alone, ascending to the catalyst room, to the black file, and, if my anonymous tip had worked, to a live camera. The elevator doors opened onto a void. Floor 40 had been all hushed, deep pile carpets and soft, recessed lighting, the scent of expensive, non-specific floral arrangements. Floor 41 was concrete, steel, and silence. The air was 20 degrees colder and smelled sharp, metallic, like an HVAC unit that's been over-chilled. And beneath that, another scent. Bleach, a faint, sterile tang, as if the floor itself was scrubbed daily to remove any trace of human presence. This was the building's nerve center, the server farms, the IT infrastructure, the place's data lived and died. It was not a place for people. The catalyst room was halfway down the main corridor. It wasn't a boardroom. It was a glorified storage closet with delusions of grandeur. The walls facing the hallway were thick, frosted glass, obscuring the inside from view, turning any movement into a dance of blurred, indistinct shadows. My heels made a sharp, Intrusive click, click, click on the polished concrete floor. A sound that felt like a betrayal. I swiped my access card. The light flashed green. The lock buzzed. Loud and electric. I pushed the heavy door open. The room was as cold as the hallway. More steel. A single, long conference table that looked like it had been repurposed from a morgue. A wall of tall, gray filing cabinets, the old school, analog kind with tumbler locks, and in the corner, high on the wall, just as I'd prayed, the dark, hemispherical dome of a security camera. Its tiny red record light was off. My heart sank. The IT ticket hadn't worked. The feed was still down. Still being serviced. I was too late. The camera was dead. I stood there for a second, feeling the cold seep into my clothes. The silence of the room was absolute. I was alone, in a dead end, with a dead camera. A surge of pure, cold fury went through me. August was wrong. My tip had failed. There would be no recording. There would be no proof from this room. But the file is still here. If I couldn't get the act on camera, I would get the evidence. I walked to the wall of cabinets. There were dozens of them. Archive 2020, Archive 2021, tax liabilities, all labeled with boring official designations. I was looking for something that didn't belong. I found it on the third cabinet, a brand new, high-security padlock, completely different from the standard issue locks on the others. But it was the keyhole itself that caught my eye. It was surrounded by a starburst of fresh, ugly, silver scratches. The metal was gouged, as if someone had jammed a key in, hard, multiple times. Not a lockpick, a crude, badly cut duplicate key. Someone in a hurry. Someone who wasn't used to physical work. Sloane. This was her black file cabinet. I didn't have a key. I had something better. In my laptop bag. I carried a thin steel case. Inside was a set of high-precision tension wrenches and tumblers. My father had insisted I learn. "You can't trust a digital lock, Kira," he'd said. "Data has no weight. Always know how to open a physical door." My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I inserted the tension wrench, applied the slightest pressure, and began to feel the pins with the pick. It was a good lock, but the mechanism was simple. Click, click, click. The fourth pin was sticky. I adjusted the tension. Click. The fifth. Snap. The cylinder turned. The heavy bar of the padlock sprang open. I pulled the drawer. It slid open with a well-oiled, expensive shh. It was almost empty. Just 3 binders. 2 were blue, labeled with obscure fund codes. 1 was black. A thick 3-ring binder. The plastic spine label was typed. Clean. HP side letter /S. My fingers trembled as I lifted it out. It was heavy. I placed it on the steel table, directly under the dead eye of the security camera. I opened it. It wasn't a copy. It was the original. Page after page of dense, legal-grade bond paper, watermarked. It was exactly what August had said. Not a derivative contract, but a special-purpose addendum to the main Helixport acquisition. It was a siphon. It detailed a series of performance-based profit-sharing tranches that would be diverted before Northbridge's primary accounts. They were diverted to a series of numbered entities, and on the final page, the signature block. Sloane Mercer, signing on behalf of Northbridge, and the counter-signature. A name I didn't recognize. Signing for Helixport Proxy Holdings, LLC. The signature itself was just a flourish, but the authorization code beneath it, I knew that code. It was one of my father's old private trust authorizations, one that Sloane would have had access to. She wasn't just siphoning money. She was using my dead father's authority to do it. I pulled out my phone. The click of the camera shutter was deafening in the cold room. I photographed every single page, the text, the watermarks, the signatures, the codes. Then I took out the USB. It was a matte black stick. No branding. A military-grade encrypted drive. Once data was written, it couldn't be erased, only accessed with a 256-bit key that existed in exactly one place, my grandfather's safe. I plugged it into the room's data port, hooked it to my phone, and began transferring the image files. A log, a record. The progress bar was crawling. 10%, 15. The room was so quiet, I could hear the high-pitched electrical whine of the data transfer. And then, a new sound. Clack. A single dry metallic clack. It came from the hallway, the sound of heavy, brushed silver hitting frosted glass. I didn't turn around. I just watched the progress bar. 20%. A shadow blurred against the frosted glass of the door. The door handle turned. Slowly, silently. The heavy door swung open. I could feel the air change. I could smell her. White pepper and something cold, like gin. "What are you doing here, Kira?" Her voice was soft, light, precise, the voice of a surgeon about to make the first cut. I didn't stop the transfer. I turned, slowly, putting my body between her and the table, my phone and the USB drive hidden behind me. She was standing in the doorway, a vision in charcoal gray. One hand was on her hip, the other was resting against the glass doorframe, and the heavy silver cuffs on her wrist were still. She'd been watching me through the glass. "Sloan," I said. My voice sounded weak, breathy. I was checking the risk parameters, the data integrity on the Helix port files. There were inconsistencies." She smiled. It was a terrible, thin-lipped expression that didn't touch her eyes. Her eyes were the color of the concrete floor. "Inconsistencies." She repeated the word as if it were something filthy she'd found on her shoe. She took a step into the room. The door hissed shut behind her. Click, the lock engaged. We were alone. "The only inconsistency I see, Kira, is you," she said, walking slowly toward me. The clack, clack, clack of her bracelets punctuated her steps. "You, on a floor you have no access to, in a room you have no business being in, opening a cabinet you have no right to." "I'm a risk analyst," I said, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "It's my job to analyze risk. This deal is a risk. This side letter. This side letter is above your pay grade," she snapped, her voice losing its surgical precision, replaced by a low, angry growl. She was 2 feet from me now. "It's above your comprehension. It's a siphon. Sloan, you're using my father's proxy codes to gut the company. I've seen it." The admission hung in the cold air. I'd shown my hand. It was a stupid rookie mistake, born of panic and anger. Her face didn't change. The smile just tightened. "You've seen nothing," she whispered. "You're a child, playing in a sandbox you don't understand. My risk is the company's future. Your risk, Kira." She took the last step, invading my personal space. I could see the tiny, perfect pores on her skin. "Your risk is your job. Your name won't save you. Your father isn't here to protect you." And then she hit me. It wasn't a flurry. It was a single, calculated, brutal act. Her hand, free of the bracelets, came up. It was an open-palmed slap, but she put her entire body weight behind it. It connected with the left side of my face, my cheekbone, my jaw, my ear. My head snapped back. The sound of it, a wet, sharp crack, echoed in the steel room. A nova of white-hot pain exploded behind my eye. My ear screamed, a sudden, high-pitched ringing. The room tilted. I stumbled back, crashing into the steel table. My phone and the USB drive clattered to the floor. "You are a little girl," Sloan hissed. Her face contorted, all the polish gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered venom. She advanced on me as I tried to right myself, my cheek already numb, my vision blurry. She pointed a finger at my face. "You are nothing. You are a sentimental relic. Your grandfather cut you off. You have no money, no power, and no allies." She bent down, her sharp blonde hair falling forward, and saw the phone and the drive on the floor. She laughed, a short, ugly, barking sound. This was your plan? A USB drive?" She kicked it. The drive skittered across the concrete and vanished under the cabinet. Let me teach you the lesson your father was too weak to, she whispered, grabbing my chin, her fingers digging in, forcing me to look at her. Her gin and pepper scent was suffocating. You will go back to your desk. You will delete your little presentation. You will not say one word in that meeting. She leaned in, her cold eyes drilling into mine. And you will remember, she spat, her voice low and dangerous, just who serves coffee to whom around here. She shoved me, hard. I fell back against the cabinet. My cheek was on fire. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. My ear was still ringing, a constant, high-pitched, and through the ringing, I heard it. From the hallway, through the heavy door, thump, thump, thump. 3 distinct, perfectly spaced, metallic on stone taps. Not 2, 3. My anonymous IT ticket, urgent, sync error, timestamp lag, request immediate diagnostic and hard reboot. The camera's tiny red light wasn't off. It was on. It had been on the entire time. The reboot had worked. It had triggered a system-wide resync, and the off light was just a maintenance facade. The feed was live. The audio was live. My grandfather, standing in the hallway, listening, watching the shadows dance on the frosted glass, had just heard every word. He had just heard the slap. He had just heard the threat. And he'd just sent me the signal. I have it. It's done. I was still gasping, my hand pressed to my screaming cheek. Sloane was watching me, her chest heaving, a faint, satisfied, cruel smirk on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. I looked up, not at her. I looked past her shoulder, at the frosted glass wall that led to the hallway. I couldn't see the camera from this angle, but I knew it was there. I knew its eye was on us. I smiled. It was a small, bloody smile. The evidence wasn't on the USB drive under the cabinet. The evidence had just slapped me across the face on a live feed, and it was beautiful. I walked into the harbor boardroom at 8:59 a.m. My left cheek was a tight, throbbing mask. The swelling had set in, a dull, fiery ache that pulsed from my jawbone to my temple. In the 41st floor executive washroom, I had done my best to cover the violent red and purple map of the injury, but the concealer was a failure. It looked exactly like what it was, a hasty, inadequate attempt to hide violence. Good. I wanted them to see it. The room was a cathedral of corporate power. A 50-foot mahogany table, polished to a mirror finish, reflected the gray, rainy light of the Grayford skyline. At the head, Marcus Thorne, the chairman, already looked bored. To his right, Sloane. She was immaculate, composed, radiant in a steel-gray dress, her heavy silver bracelets gleaming. She looked as if she had just stepped out of a spa, not a storage room where she'd assaulted an employee. She met my gaze as I took my seat at the far end of the table, a silent, cold glance of dismissal. You're too late. You're already irrelevant. Jensen, the CFO, and Doyle, the head of legal, flanked her, a small, nervous phalanx. The rest of the board, the independent directors, the old guard my father had once called his friends, shuffled their papers, ready to approve the deal and get to lunch. The clock on the wall, a minimalist digital display, clicked to 9 o'clock. "We are convened," Thorne said, his voice flat. He tapped his pen on the table. "The primary agenda item is the final vote on the Helixport acquisition. Sloane, the board has your projections. The floor is yours for a final summary." Sloane stood. The clack-clack of her bracelets was the only sound. She was in her element, a predator sighting its kill. She didn't just walk to the podium, she occupied it. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Her voice was smooth, confident. "The numbers, as you've seen, are not just good, they're transformative. A projected 35% ROI in the first 24 months. Complete capture of the coast-to-coast logistics data market. This isn't just an acquisition. It's a redefinition of Northbridge. It ensures our dominance for the next 50 years. She smiled, a vision of competent, aggressive leadership. The due diligence is complete. The financing is secure. We anticipate a unanimous approval to execute. Thorne nodded, a puppet on her string. Thank you. Sloane, a robust and exciting projection. The chair will now move to the vote. Mr. Chairman? I stood up. My voice was hoarse, and it cracked. Every one of the 20 faces at the table turned to me. I felt the heat of their annoyance. Sloane's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went arctic. Thorne scowled. Ms. Lowell, this is highly irregular. This is a final vote, not a Q&A. Your department's risk assessment was submitted. My preliminary assessment was submitted, sir, I said, my voice finding its steel. My final assessment, based on critical data that only became available this morning, is not in your packets. It is my fiduciary duty to ensure the board reviews this data before proceeding. A murmur rippled through the directors. This was not on the agenda. Sloane shot a look at Thorne, a silent, venomous command. He sighed, his frustration obvious. Ms. Lowell, you are testing the patience of this board. You have 3 minutes, not a second more. Thank you. I walked the length of the room, my heels clicking, the throb in my face keeping a perfect, painful rhythm. I unplugged Sloane's laptop from the podium and plugged in my own, the massive 8K screen behind her, which had just shown her dream numbers, flickered and displayed my desktop. The integrity of the Helix Port deal, I began, my voice amplified by the room's microphones, rests on 2 pillars, the financial data of the target company and the legal authority of our own signatories. Both are fraudulent. I clicked Exhibit A, the signatory logs for the primary contract. I displayed the raw metadata. You will note Mr. Jensen's signature, our CFO, was authorized at 2:17 a.m. this past Sunday. You will also note the authorization IP address. I highlighted the string of numbers. It does not trace to his home network, a company VPN, or even his location in the Hamptons that weekend. It traces to AA server in a non-extradition jurisdiction in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. Jensen, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat bolt upright. He went the color of old parchment. That's impossible. That's a lie. I'm sure you were surprised to see it, I said, not looking at him. I clicked again. Exhibit B, the server-side validation logs, the core financial data, which was supposedly locked by legal on Friday, was accessed and altered after Mr. Doyle's final sign-off. The file was modified to inflate assets, and then the timestamp was rolled back to appear legitimate. They were clean, but they forgot to scrub the root server's own access log. I showed them the raw code, the mismatch, the digital fingerprint of the crime. The numbers you saw are a fiction. This isn't an acquisition. It's a Trojan horse, designed to mask. That is enough. Sloane's voice was a physical blow. She was on her feet, her face a mask of incandescent rage. Mr. Chairman, this is a disgraceful and desperate spectacle. Ms. Lowell has clearly violated every data access protocol in this company. She has brought unauthorized, likely fabricated, internal documents into this boardroom in a pathetic attempt to sabotage a deal vital to this company's future. Thorne, seeing his lifeline, seized it. Ms. Lowell, you are profoundly out of order. Your access to company systems is suspended, effective immediately. Security. The heavy oak door to the boardroom hissed open. He was there, my grandfather, pushing the stainless steel coffee cart. He was the picture of humble service, cap low, eyes downcast. Coffee service, he murmured, his voice raspy and ignorable. My apologies for the interruption. Sloane, momentarily thrown by the intrusion, snapped. Get that out of here. This is a closed session. Now. My apologies, ma'am, August said, his voice a perfect whisper of deference. He was already moving, pouring. Compliments of the executive office. They insisted on a fresh service for the vote. He was moving with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. placing fresh ceramic cups on the mahogany table. He was buying me seconds. He placed a cup in front of Thorne, then Doyle. Then he got to Jensen, the pale, sweating CFO. August paused, holding two small porcelain bowls. "Who uses brown sugar?" he asked, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the tension. It was the question, the signal. Jensen, his nerves shattered, distracted by his name on a Romanian server log, raised a shaking hand. "I do. Here." August smiled, a tiny, fleeting smile that no one saw but me. He placed the bowl down. His other hand, the one holding his walnut cane, was steady. He tapped the cane on the plush carpet. Thump! The sound was completely absorbed by the thick pile. It was inaudible, but it wasn't a sound. It was a digital go, I knew, with absolute, chilling certainty, that 2 blocks away, his personal lawyer, the most ruthless litigator in Grayford, had just activated a live audio feed. The entire boardroom, all its procedures and pretenses, was now a hostile deposition. Sloane had recovered. "Security!" she yelled, jabbing a button on her console. "Remove this man and Ms. Lowell from the boardroom. This instant. The vote will proceed." "No," I said. Sloane turned, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say to me?" I said no. I turned back to the podium. My hand was on the mouse. "You're right, Sloane, I did breach protocol, and you're right that I went to a floor I shouldn't have." I clicked a new file on my desktop, a video file. Catalyst feed 0845.mp4. But I wasn't the only one. I hit enter. The 8K screen behind Sloane's head flickered to life. The audio system, designed for global teleconferencing, broadcast every sound with terrifying clarity. The room was suddenly filled with the cold, sterile image of the catalyst room, my own back, the black binder. Then, the clack of her bracelets, the door swinging open, Sloane's voice, amplified, filling the room. "What are you doing here, Kira?" The boardroom was utterly silent. No one breathed. They watched, mesmerized, as the scene played out. They heard me try to explain. They heard Sloane's cold, precise response. "My risk is the company's future. Your risk, Kira, is your job." And then, the act itself. The screen showed Sloane's hand lashing out. The high-fidelity audio system amplified the impact, the sickening, wet crack of the slap, my head snapping back, the sound of my gasp. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the boardroom. 2 of the independent directors physically recoiled. Thorne's jaw fell open. On the screen, Sloane, my stepmother, leaned in, her face a mask of contempt. Her voice, a venomous whisper, was now a roar in the silent room. "You are nothing. You are a sentimental relic. Your grandfather cut you off. You have no money, no power, and no allies. And you will remember just who serves coffee to whom around here." The video continued. It showed her kicking my phone. It showed her shoving me against the cabinet. It showed me, hand to my bleeding face, looking up into the camera, and smiling. I paused the feed on that smile. I turned to the room. My hand was perfectly steady. I slowly, deliberately, pointed to the swollen, purpled, concealer-smeared mark on my own cheek, the one they had all politely ignored. "Exhibit C," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence. Sloane was frozen. She looked small. The color had drained from her face, leaving a sickly pale foundation. Her eyes darted from the screen, to me, to Thorne. My grandfather was still by the coffee cart. He hadn't moved. He was holding a silver coffee pot, poised to pour. A single dark drop of coffee fell from the spout. It landed on the mirror-finished mahogany table. It hit with a soft tick that sounded like a cannon shot. It was the only sound, the dark, oily drop spreading, staining the priceless wood, the end of a legacy. Marcus Thorne, the chairman, finally found his voice. He was ashen. He looked at Sloane with a new, profound terror. He was realizing that he was tied to a sinking anchor. This meeting, he stammered, standing up so abruptly he knocked over his crystal water glass. This meeting is suspended. The board will move to an immediate emergency executive session to review this new information, now. He jabbed a shaking finger at Sloane. You will remain here. He turned his terrified, desperate eyes to me. You will come with us. The board was in chaos. Not a loud chaos, a terrible, silent, unraveling chaos. Directors were staring at the paused image on the screen. My bloody, defiant smile. They were staring at my actual, swollen face. They were staring at Sloane, who stood by the podium, exposed, her skin the color of ash, and they were staring at Marcus Thorne, the chairman, who was sputtering, his authority gone, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. This meeting is suspended, he'd yelled, knocking over his water. The crystal glass rolled across the mahogany, leaving a dark, wet trail. We will reconvene. Executive session. Ms. Lowell, you will come with us. Ms. Mercer, you will wait here. Security. He was looking for a lifeline, an escape. He was trying to take me, the evidence, into a private room where he could gauge the damage, find a narrative, and salvage his own position. He was trying to regain control. He never had it. I don't believe an executive session will be necessary. Marcus, the voice came from the side of the room. It was not Thorne's. It was not mine. It was the barista's. Every head turned. My grandfather, August Lowell, was still standing by his coffee cart. He looked, for all the world, like a service worker who had overstepped, who had spoken out of turn. Sloane, her eyes wide with a new, confused fury, snapped at him. I told you to get out, she hissed. Who in God's name do you think you are? August didn't answer her. He simply pushed his cart away from the wall. He wheeled it slowly, deliberately, into the center of the room, just a few feet from the head of the table. He was no longer serving. He was taking the stage. He looked at Thorne, who was frozen, his hand still outstretched. Sit down, Marcus, August said. His voice was no longer the raspy, deferential whisper. It was a command, a baritone of absolute, unquestionable power that had not been heard in this room for over 2 years. Thorne's mouth opened and closed. He didn't sit, but he stopped moving. Slowly, deliberately. My grandfather reached up. He took the gray, nondescript baseball cap from his head. He tossed it onto the cart, where it landed on a pile of napkins. The low fluorescent light of the boardroom glinted off a full, familiar head of thick, perfectly combed silver hair. An audible gasp came from Bill Jensen, the CFO. August's hand went to his face. He removed the cheap, wire-rimmed drugstore glasses. He tossed them onto the cap. And his eyes, the clear, cold, piercing blue eyes of the Lowell dynasty, swept the table. It was like a current of electricity had passed through the room. Doyle, the head of legal, made a small, choking sound, as if he'd been punched. 2 of the old guard directors, men in their 70s who had known him for half a century, looked as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces, moments ago annoyed and impatient, were now slack-jawed with a terror that was almost religious. August, Thorne whispered. The name was a prayer, or a curse. Sloane had not moved. She didn't gasp. She just stopped. Her entire body, her entire being, seemed to have frozen in time. The predator, the COO, the woman of absolute control, was staring at the one person in the world who held more cards, the one person she had never factored in. She had assumed he was a relic, a retired old man, grieving his son, disengaged. She had been wrong. We have been remiss, August said, his voice filling the room, a resonant, powerful instrument. He began to walk, slowly, from his cart toward the head of the table, His walnut cane, the one with the rubber tip, was in his hand. It tapped softly on the plush carpet. Thump, thump, thump. Not a signal, just the sound of his arrival. "We have allowed strangers to handle the assets," he said, his gaze sweeping over the new, younger directors Sloane had brought in. "We have allowed amateurs," he continued, his eyes landing on Marcus Thorne, "to manage the board." He stopped at the head of the table, directly across from Sloane, who stood next to me and the podium. He looked at her, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "And we have allowed thieves," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet, "to brew the formula of our truth for far too long." He looked at the single, dark drop of coffee that had stained the table, the one that had fallen from his pot. "Coffee is served, Ms. Mercer, but it seems you've been serving a different blend." The boardroom was a tomb. The only thing you could hear was the faint hum of the server, broadcasting my frozen, smiling image on the screen behind him. "The HP side letter S," August said. My heart leaped. He wasn't asking. He was telling. He looked directly at Bill Jensen, the CFO. "An addendum to the Helixport acquisition, authorizing the diversion of performance-based profits to a proxy holding, LLC." Jensen looked like he was going to be sick. He was clutching his chest. "You recognized the brown sugar question, didn't you, Bill?" August asked, his voice almost conversational. "It was the code name my son used for his philanthropic trust, the one you and I set up in 2015, the Brown Sugar Fund, for the Children's Hospital." August turned to the rest of the board. "Mr. Jensen, it seems, has authorized the diversion of funds intended for pediatric care to a series of offshore accounts." He didn't need to read a list. He knew. He was reciting it from memory. "To entity 7074A, he snapped, his voice sharp. "Account code 92 Delta. To entity 112B, account 45 Foxtrot. To entity 209C, account 88 Kilo A." He turned to Doyle, the head of legal. "Codes, Mr. Doyle, that you personally drafted the covenants for, covenants that were to be irrevocable, covenants that my son signed, believing they would protect his legacy of giving, not," he spat, "fund this." He gestured to Sloane. He gestured to the fraudulent deal. He had known all of it, the report I'd written, the one that had been stolen from my desk, the one his cleaning staff had recovered from the shred bin. It hadn't been a revelation to him. It had been a confirmation that I had found it, too. He lifted his walnut cane. He reached across the table, over the stain, over the spilled water, to the polished, empty space in front of the chairman's seat, and he laid the cane down, horizontally, on the mirror-finish mahogany. A single dark line of polished wood. It wasn't a weapon. It was a barrier, a line drawn, a final, non-negotiable measurement between what was right and what was wrong, between what was his and what they had tried to steal. The silence that followed was broken by Sloane. Her voice was unrecognizable. The surgical precision was gone. The venom from the catalyst room was gone. It was soft, pleading, desperate. "August." She took a half-step toward him, her hands, with their heavy metallic bracelets, open and palms up, a gesture of surrender. "August, please, stop this. We can discuss this, privately." She was trying to smile, but it was a horrifying grimace. "Please, for the family, for David's memory. This is not what he would have wanted. This public spectacle. Think of the company. Think of the family." It was her last, desperate gamble. The family card. The widow's plea. My grandfather looked at her. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, it was with the simple, devastating finality of a judge passing sentence. "Family?" he asked, his voice quiet, yet it seemed to shake the very windows. He turned his head, just slightly, and pointed his chin at me, at my swollen, bruised face, still visible to every person in the room. What family? Sloan? The one you assault in a server room? He gestured to the screen, to the video of her threat. The one you steal from? The one you threaten? He turned his full attention back to her. His eyes were not angry, they were impossibly sad, and that was so much worse. A family built on forged documents? A legacy preserved in a black file? No, that is not my family. That is not his legacy. My son. My son was many things. He was kind. He was trusting. He was, as Kira has proven, a terrible judge of character. He looked directly at her. But he was not a thief. You are not family. You are a criminal. And this is not a family matter. It is an indictment. He turned away from her, as if she no longer existed, and addressed the horrified board. As of 9:15 a.m. this morning, August announced, his voice ringing with formal authority, I have filed an emergency petition with the probate court and the trustees of the Lowell Family Trust. The temporary voting rights which my son's will placed in the stewardship of this board are hereby revoked, pending a full criminal investigation. Thorne, Jensen, and Doyle all slumped as if their strings had been cut. The power was gone. Pending that investigation, August continued, my proxy, the controlling proxy of Northbridge Capital Systems, is transferred, effective immediately, to the Independent Audit Committee, the true independent members, he said, nodding to two of the older shocked directors. Not, and he gestured his chin at Thorne, Jensen, and Doyle, the ones complicit in this fraud. As he finished speaking, the heavy oak doors to the boardroom swung open. Not quietly, they were pushed open, hard. A man I had never seen before, in a severe, dark, ruthlessly expensive suit, entered. He was carrying a heavy, old-fashioned leather briefcase. He was flanked by two other men in suits, who looked less like lawyers and more like federal agents. This is Mr. Harrigan, August said calmly, as if introducing a new guest at a dinner party. My personal counsel. He is here to oversee the transition. Harrigan walked with purpose. He ignored Sloan, who was standing, frozen, a statue of her former self. He ignored the coffee cart. He walked directly to the head of the table, to the terrified Marcus Thorne. He placed his briefcase on the table, next to August's cane. He opened it and took out a thick, leather-bound document. He placed it in front of Thorne. Mr. Thorne, Harrigan said, his voice like rocks grinding together. This is a legal hold and a data preservation order for the entire Northbridge executive server stack. All personal and company-issued devices on the 40th and 41st floors, and the contents and recordings of this room. You, Mr. Jensen, Mr. Doyle, and Miss Mercer are instructed not to leave, or to delete, alter, or move any data. The independent auditors are already in the elevator. Harrigan looked at Sloan, his eyes flat and devoid of any emotion. Ms. Mercer, you will surrender your devices, now. I was still at the podium. I hadn't moved. My role was over. The play was done. My gaze fell to the table in front of me. The cup of coffee. The one August had given me. What felt like a lifetime ago. In the lobby. The one I had carried up here and forgotten. It was cold. My hand reached for it. The hand was shaking. Not from fear, not from the pain in my cheek. It was the adrenaline crash. The sudden, violent release of a pressure I had been holding for a year. The terror, the anger, the grief. It was all exiting my body, leaving me trembling. The hand was shaking, but my eyes were not. I lifted the cup. I met my grandfather's gaze across the long, ruined mahogany table. He didn't smile. He just held my look. The game was not Sloane's. It had never been Sloane's. It was, and always had been, his, and he had just, finally, passed it to me. The boardroom was no longer a boardroom. It was a crime scene. Harrigan, my grandfather's lawyer, was the new center of gravity. His voice was flat, procedural, and backed by the full weight of the Lowell Trust. The two men who had entered with him were not lawyers. They were forensic data specialists, and they moved with terrifying efficiency. "Mr. Thorne," Harrigan said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. The chairman, who was still standing, pale and shaking, flinched as if he'd been struck. "You will use your console, now." Thorne looked at August, who simply nodded once, obey. Thorne, his hand trembling so violently he could barely hit the keys, fumbled with the touchscreen console. What do I? "You will activate Emergency Protocol 77, Alpha," Harrigan commanded. "IT lockdown. Freeze all executive server backups. Snapshot all live data. C-suite level, and you will suspend all access credentials, physical and digital, for Floor 41. Effective immediately." Thorne's fingers moved. On the wall, a small, discreet red light near the fire suppression system flashed once, then held steady. The lockdown was active. In that instant, every digital escape route vanished. Sloane knew it. She had been frozen, a statue of disbelief, but this digital finality, spurred her to action. Her hand dove into her purse. She pulled out her phone. Her thumbs, usually so precise and fast, were a blur, jabbing at the screen. She was trying to send a text, a signal, a delete command to a hidden contact in IT, a transfer command to a financial institution. She held the phone up, her arm rigid, staring at the screen. "It's not working," she whispered, her voice a low, strangled sound. "It's not. There's no signal." My grandfather, who was still standing by his cane, spoke. "We took the liberty of activating the emergency cellular and Wi-Fi jammers. Ms. Mercer," he said, his voice calm. "It's a standard feature of the boardroom, in case of a hostile takeover attempt." He looked at her, his eyes cold. "Which, by my definition, this is—" The room was a box, a steel trap. No data in, no data out. The silence that followed was absolute. The power, which had been held by Sloane for a year, and which had momentarily hung in the air, had now settled. It was back with its owner. And the rats began to turn. One of the independent directors, a man named Kensing, whom I knew to be one of Sloane's staunchest allies, suddenly stood up. His face was slick with a patina of cold sweat. He was smoothing his tie, his hands shaking. "Mr. Lowell, August," he began, his voice oily and false. "I want the record to show, I wanted to show that I had significant reservations about the Helixport deal." Sloane turned her head, slowly, to look at him. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated murder. Kensing refused to meet her gaze. He was talking directly to August, a desperate, fawning plea. The side letter, in particular, I felt the structure was irregular. "In fact, Sloane," he said, turning on her with a sudden, vicious righteousness. "I have the email. The email I sent you last week, questioning the proxy authorizations. I have it." He was offering her up, a sacrifice, to save his own skin. He was proving his loyalty to the new, old king. August did not look at him. He did not acknowledge the plea. He did not offer immunity. He didn't smile. He didn't thank him. He treated Kensing's desperate betrayal with the cold contempt it deserved. He turned his head, just slightly, toward Harrigan. Then, he looked down at the floor, lifted his walnut cane an inch, and tapped it on the plush carpet. "Thump, thump." 2 taps, a signal. "Send it to the evidence vault," August said, his voice flat. He still wasn't looking at Kensing. "Mr. Harrigan's team will provide you with a secure upload link momentarily. Your cooperation will be evaluated." Kensing wilted, his gambit for immediate forgiveness denied. He was just another source, another piece of evidence. He sat down, heavily, a broken man. The heist was moving fast. While the board was absorbing this, one of Harrigan's men, a tall man with the cold eyes of a lifer in digital forensics, approached Sloane. He was holding a clear plastic evidence bag. "Ms. Mercer, your phone," Your tablet. Your building access card. Now. The sound. That was the thing I'll never forget. The sound of her heavy, silver bracelets. Her symbols of power. Clack, clack, clacking against each other as she, for the last time, gathered her devices. Her hands were shaking in rage. She didn't hand them to him. She dropped them, contemptuously, on the table. He picked them up, one by one, with a gloved hand, sealed them in the bag, and labeled it. At the same time, the other specialist, a woman with a severe haircut, approached me at the podium. Her voice was quiet, respectful. "Ms. Lowell, the USB drive you used for the presentation, may I?" I looked at the small, encrypted drive still plugged into my laptop. It held my exhibits A and B, the server logs, the Romanian IP address, the proof. I pulled it out and handed it to her. She didn't just take it, she placed it in its own, smaller evidence bag. She sealed it with a red tab. Then she handed me a small, illuminated tablet. "Chain of custody log, please, ma'am, a signature, stating you are voluntarily surrendering this drive to the independent audit team." Before the entire room, before my grandfather, before the woman who had just assaulted me. I signed my name, Kira Lowell. It felt like the first time I had ever truly written it. Sloane watched the entire exchange. She watched me sign. She watched me hand over the final nail. The trap was sprung. The evidence was secure. Her allies were turning. Her communications were dark. She was, for the first time in her life, completely and utterly cornered. And so she turned on the only person left, me. She was across the room, but her voice was a low, penetrating hiss that carried over the shuffling of the lawyers. Her eyes, stripped of all their polish and calculation, were just burning pits of hatred. "Kira..." I looked up from the tablet. "You," she spat. "You did this. You... with him," she gestured to my grandfather. "You ungrateful little... after everything your father. You betrayed us. You betrayed your own house." The accusation hung in the silence. You betrayed us. She was trying to paint me as the villain, the disloyal child who had brought ruin. I felt the throb in my cheek, the fiery, deep purple bruise that was her signature. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was listening. "No, Sloane," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I didn't betray the house. I saved it." I took a step out from behind the podium. I was facing her. "I didn't betray you. I betrayed the fraud. I betrayed the black file. I betrayed the forged signatures and the stolen money. I betrayed your lies." I held her gaze. "You're right," I said. "I did betray something. I betrayed the forgery you've been living for the last year, and I am done." The finality of it, the simple, unassailable truth, broke her. It was the end, and the final, pathetic nail had to be hammered in by the man she had so thoroughly corrupted. August looked at Marcus Thorne. "Marcus..." The chairman flinched. He looked like a man who had aged 50 years in the last 15 minutes. "You are," August said, his voice laced with a cold irony. "Still the chairman of this board. For now, you have a duty to perform. Perform it." Thorne knew, in that moment, that his only path forward, his only microscopically thin chance of avoiding prosecution himself, was to be the instrument, to be the one who, officially, swung the axe he had, minutes ago, been protecting. He stood. He was shaking. He was reading from a script only he could see, a script of pure, panicked self-preservation. By the authority vested in me as chairman of Northbridge Capital Systems, and in light of he swallowed, the information presented, I am formally suspending Ms. Sloane Mercer as Chief Operating Officer and as a member of this board, effective immediately. He was looking at her, his eyes pleading for an understanding she would never give. All duties, all access, and all authorizations are revoked," he stammered. Pending the results of the independent audit and and criminal investigation. He took a ragged breath, a man finishing a marathon. Furthermore, he said, I am calling an emergency special session of this board. The non-compromised members of this board, he added, with a terrified as sidelong glance at August, to convene in 1 hour to vote on her permanent legal removal from this company. It was done. The corporate execution, read by her closest ally. Sloane didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't object. She just deflated. The rage, the venom, the fight. It all just evaporated. She turned away from us, away from the table, away from the lawyers, away from my grandfather. She walked, her steps no longer the confident clack of a predator, but the slow, silent tread of a ghost, to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. She stood there, her back to the room. She was staring out at the Grayford skyline, at the city that had, an hour ago, been hers for the taking. I watched her. I didn't see her, but I saw her reflection in the dark, rain-streaked glass. The light was hitting the window just right. I saw her face, mirrored against the clouds. The mask of confidence was gone. The immaculate, icy beauty was gone. The power was gone. For the first time, her reflection showed no confidence, no plan, no angle. It just showed. Nothing, a vacancy, an emptiness, the hollowed-out look of a queen who had just been, definitively, checkmated. The room was completely silent. We were all watching this silent, still life of her defeat. And into that heavy, tomb-like silence, a new sound began to grow. The sound of the storm. The rain, which had been a steady, miserable mist, suddenly intensified. A squall line hit the building, the wind howled, and the rain began to lash the windows. A sudden, violent, drumming roar. The sound was deafening, filling the sterile room with a sudden, wild, natural fury. It sounded, in that moment, like the entire city was finally, thunderously, applauding. The emergency session convened not in an hour, but in the next 60 seconds. It was a formality, a public execution. Harrigan, my grandfather's lawyer, had taken the chairman's seat. The compromised directors, Thorne, Jensen, and Doyle, were gone, escorted by Harrigan's men to a separate, smaller conference room where their own lawyers were, presumably, being frantically summoned. The remaining independent directors, the clean ones, looked pale and shaken. The auditors, 2 men and a woman, had taken the empty seats, their laptops open, their faces impassive. The rain hammered the glass, a constant, angry drumming. Sloane was still standing by the window, a prisoner in the room she had, an hour ago, commanded. She had not been invited to sit. Harrigan's voice was a flat, procedural monotone. The Independent Audit Committee is now in session. The motion before this committee is the permanent removal of Ms. Sloane Mercer from her position as Chief Operating Officer and from her seat on this board, effective immediately. He paused. And the second part of that motion, the immediate referral of all findings, including the audio-visual recordings presented today, to the District Attorney's Office and the SEC for criminal prosecution. This was it, the final, irreversible turn of the key. Before Harrigan could call the question, Sloane turned from the window. The reflection vanished. Her face, pale and taut, was a mask of cold, analytical fury. She looked past Harrigan, past the auditors. She looked directly at me. Her voice was not loud. It was sharp, clear, and laced with a new, venomous kind of pity. Kira, I did not move. Rethink this, right now? I said nothing. My silence was a wall. She took a step toward me, toward the podium. You think you've won? You think this? She gestured to my grandfather, who stood silently by his cart. Is a rescue? You think he saved you? She let out a short, bitter laugh. He's a user. He uses people. He used your father, and now he's using you. He needed a clean pawn to make the first move, and you were it. Her eyes drilled into mine. the moment you are no longer useful. Kira, he will abandon you. He will cut you off, just like he did last month. He will throw you away, just like he is throwing me away. You're just a tool, and you're too stupid to even see it. It was her last move, not a legal maneuver, not a corporate one, a psychological one, an attempt to plant a seed of doubt, to poison the victory. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The words were just noise, the last desperate rattling of a cage. I looked down at the cold, forgotten cup of coffee on the podium, the one he had given me in the lobby, the one that had started it all. A movement broke my gaze. My grandfather, who had been watching this exchange with a face of granite, pushed off from his cart. He walked past Sloane, his presence erasing her from the space. He walked to the podium. He picked up the cold cup. He didn't say a word. He walked back to his cart, poured the cold, stale coffee into a drain bucket, and took a fresh, steaming ceramic cup from a thermal unit. He filled it from a new pot. He walked back to me, in front of the entire room. He placed the new cup on the podium, directly in front of my hands. The steam rose, a small, white flag of warmth, a public, definitive, silent answer to her accusation. He did not abandon me. He served me. He straightened up. He looked at the auditors. He looked at the remaining, terrified directors. His voice was loud, formal, and it rang with the finality of a gavel. The audit committee is convened. The evidence has been presented. He looked at Harrigan, who nodded. He then turned his gaze back to the room. The motion is on the floor, before the final vote. Ms. Kira Lowell will present the board with her final recommendations for immediate action. It was a transfer of power, a coronation. He had just, in one sentence, named me the voice of the company's future. The board members, the auditors, all of them, were now staring at me, waiting. August took half a step back, positioning himself just behind my shoulder, a gesture of support, not control. He leaned in, just an inch, his proximity a shield. His voice was a whisper, a vibration only I could hear. The contrast to his public declaration was everything. Kiki! My heart kicked, a single, hard beat. Finish it. I took a deep breath. The pain in my cheek was a dull, steady throb, a physical reminder of the truth. I looked at the auditors. I looked at the directors. I did not look at Sloane. My voice was clear. The hoarseness, the tremor, all of it was gone. My recommendations are threefold, I said. 1, an immediate, unanimous vote to nullify the Helixport acquisition agreement, citing gross financial malfeasance, fraudulent inducement, and a clear conspiracy to defraud Northbridge Capital. I let the legal weight of those words settle. 2, we retain external, independent counsel, a firm with no prior connection to this company, to launch a full internal investigation into all off-balance sheet funds, special purpose entities, and executive-level contracts authorized by Ms. Mercer, Mr. Thorne, Mr. Jensen, and Mr. Doyle. This investigation will be retroactive to the date of my father's death, and its findings will be unsealed. I took another breath. This was the final turn of the screw. And 3, a full, unredacted copy of our findings, including the black file, the full server logs, and the complete, unedited audio and video recordings from the Catalyst Room, will be compiled by Mr. Harrigan's team and turned over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office, not tomorrow, by 5:00 p.m., today. I finished. I had just recommended the company sue itself and invite prosecution. It was the only way to clean the wound. The head auditor, the woman who had taken my USB drive, was the first to speak. She addressed the room. The audit committee has reviewed Ms. Lowell's preliminary analysis and the physical evidence from floor 41, she stated for the record, her voice flat. We find sufficient preliminary basis to support all 3 of her recommendations. We find them not just prudent, but necessary. Harrigan stepped forward. The vote is on the floor, all 3 recommendations, as a single, non-severable motion. The independent directors will vote first, by voice. He looked at the first director, an older man named Hayes. "Aye," Hayes said, his voice firm. "Aye," said the next. "Aye, aye, aye." All five, unanimous. The Lowell Family Trust proxy, Harrigan continued, now held by the Audit Committee, also votes, yea. On the massive 8K screen, the simple voting interface, which had been set up in the background, flashed. Motion passes. Vote tally by share weight, 78% yea. Vote tally by director, 100% yea. It was done, the legal, mathematical, and moral end. Sloane, who had been watching this, her face a mask of stone, finally, completely, broke. The facade of the COO, the sophisticated widow, the untouchable executive, didn't just crack, it shattered, it evaporated. Her face twisted into something ugly, primitive, a mask of pure reptilian hatred. "You," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural curse. "You little bitch." She was no longer speaking to the room. She was speaking to me. "You and that old bastard. You think this is over? You think, I will burn, I will bury." She was just muttering, cursing, livid, incoherent promises of ruin, her eyes darting around the room, looking for a weapon, an escape, and finding none. The politeness was gone, the veneer was gone. This was the real Sloane, the one from the catalyst room. But no one was listening to her. The main boardroom doors slid open with a soft hiss. Two uniformed, armed security guards, not the building's usual staff, but private security, part of Harrigan's team, stepped just inside the doorway. They were built like refrigerators, and their faces were completely blank. They didn't look at us, they just looked at Sloane. They stood at ease, hands crossed, waiting. Their presence was the final statement. Sloane saw them. She saw the guards. She saw the auditors, who were already standing, packing their evidence bags. She saw me. She saw August. She stopped cursing, her mouth clamped shut. She gathered her purse. Her movements were jerky, clumsy. Her heavy silver bracelets made one last, desperate clack-clack. She was defeated. I turned away from her. I didn't need to watch her leave. I looked at the podium, at the fresh steaming cup of coffee August had poured for me. I reached for it. My hand was no longer shaking. I lifted the cup. The ceramic was hot against my fingers. The steam rose, smelling of dark roast and justice. I took a sip. It was hot. It was strong. It was bitter. And it was the best thing I have ever tasted. It was the first cup of coffee I'd had today that felt warm, truly warm. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't a test. It was just coffee, a reward. I looked across the room, over the rim of the cup, at my grandfather. He was watching me, not Sloane, me. He saw me drink. He saw my hand was steady. He saw my eyes. He saw it was finished. August Lowell didn't smile. He didn't applaud. He simply, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Once. The revenge was over. The war was won. Right here, at this table. The digital execution was instantaneous. Harrigan, my grandfather's counsel, simply nodded to the female forensics expert who had set up her laptop at the end of the table. Lockdown complete. Execute revocation. Full protocol. The woman's fingers tapped a single command. On the massive 8K screen, the voting results vanished, replaced by a cascading real-time system log. It was the digital equivalent of a guillotine. 9:48:01 a.m. S. Mercer admin privileges revoked. 9:48:03 a.m. S. Mercer calendar archive 2 audit vault 9:48:05 a.m. S. Mercer email inbox frozen FWA Delegal 9:48:07 a.m. S. Mercer physical access suspended all floors. 9:48:10 a.m. S. Mercer voicemail archived. 9:48:12 a.m. S. Mercer all systems access terminated. In less than 60 seconds, Sloan Mercer, the corporate entity, was erased. Her digital ghost, all her emails, her files, her secret calendars, was now the property of the auditors. Sloan herself was still standing by the window. She had watched her name be deleted. Harrigan closed his briefcase. "Ms. Mercer," he said, his voice flat. "The guards will escort you to your office. You will be permitted 10 minutes to gather your personal, non-company-related effects. Your assistant is en route with a box. You will not touch a keyboard. You will not make a call. You will then be escorted from the building." The legal machinery was done. Now, the quiet, humiliating logistics of the fall. The boardroom doors opened. The clean directors, the ones who had survived, began to file out, their faces pale, their expressions a mixture of shock and profound relief. They avoided looking at Sloan. They avoided looking at me. They just wanted to be gone. As I walked out into the 40th floor atrium, I saw her assistant, a young woman named Jess, whom Sloan had always treated like a dog, walking stiffly toward Sloan's office. She was being escorted by one of the new, grim-faced guards. She was holding a single, empty, brown cardboard box, the standard-issue box of the disgraced. I didn't watch her go in. I didn't need to. But as I passed the corridor, I heard, faintly, the sound of Sloan's office door opening. I heard the clack, clack, clack of her bracelets. And then I heard a new sound, a dry metallic rattle, clack, thunk. The sound of her heavy, silver cuffs, her symbols of power, being dropped, one by one, into the bottom of that empty cardboard box. My phone, which had been silent and dark in my pocket due to the signal jammer, suddenly vibrated to life. The jammer was off. A cascade of notifications, a dozen emails and texts, all flooded in at once. The first one at the top of the list was a Google alert I'd set for Northbridge Capital. The alert was for a press release, dated today, timed 9:50 a.m. It was already live. I tapped it. The headline was clean, sharp, and brutal. Northbridge Capital Systems reaffirms commitment to integrity. Cancels Helixport acquisition pending full internal audit. Integrity. The statement, already distributed to every major newswire, announced the immediate suspension of Sloan Mercer and several other unnamed executives, citing financial irregularities and a breach of fiduciary duty discovered by an internal risk assessment. It announced the Lowell Family Trust had reassigned its proxy to the Independent Audit Committee to ensure a transparent and thorough investigation. My grandfather hadn't just been planning a coup. He'd had the entire post-war press strategy written, approved, and loaded before he even stepped into his barista uniform. He knew he was going to win. He had just been waiting for the players to seat themselves. I walked to the executive elevator bank, the one furthest from Sloan's office. I needed air. I needed to be out of this rarefied, toxic atmosphere. As I waited, I saw her, one last time. Down the long corridor, by the other elevator bank, the two guards stood at a respectful, intimidating distance. Sloan was alone, standing in front of the mirrored steel doors, the cardboard box at her feet. She was just waiting. She wasn't cursing. She wasn't crying. She was just a woman in an expensive dress, staring at her own distorted reflection. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. She picked up the box. She stepped inside. She did not look back. The steel doors slid shut, the two halves meeting perfectly, wiping her reflection from the world. It was a lid closing, a final, definitive, silent thud. The door in front of me opened. I stepped in. And he was there. My grandfather, standing by his cart, which he must have wheeled out just moments behind me. He wasn't looking at me. He was busy, his back partially turned, wiping down the stainless steel counter with a damp cloth. He reached up. He took the gray baseball cap from the cart. He settled it back on his silver hair, pulling the brim low, shadowing his eyes. The performance was complete. Right down to the exit. August Lowell was gone. The invisible barista was back, just a man at the end of a long, difficult shift. I stood in the corner, my hands in my pockets. The elevator began its smooth, silent descent. The doors hissed open at floor 25. A junior analyst stepped in, a young guy from my own risk department, Liam. He was holding a stack of binders, his face a mask of frantic energy. He saw me, and he stopped cold. His eyes immediately went to my face, to the swollen, purpled, badly concealed bruise. The rumors were already flying. The entire building must have been vibrating with them. "Ms. Lowell," he stammered. Are you okay?" "It's been a productive morning." "Liam," I said. My voice was quiet. He swallowed, his eyes darting from my face to the unassuming barista in the corner, and then back to me. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, his curiosity overriding his caution. I was in the lobby," he whispered. "This morning, when he nodded at my grandfather. "When he brought you that coffee, I was at the next table. I heard him." He paused, then took the plunge. "He called you Kiki. I heard it. That's some nickname. It's pretty." He was trying to connect, to be an ally, to understand what he had just witnessed. I turned my head and looked at my own reflection in the mirrored steel of the elevator door. I saw the girl from this morning, the one who was terrified, the one rehearsing her lines. She was gone. In her place was this woman, with a tired face and a violent bruise. The reflection didn't look scared. It looked free. "It is," I said, my voice soft, but with a new, hard edge I'd never heard before. I met the analyst's eyes in the reflection. "It's the name of someone who doesn't bow anymore." Liam's friendly smile evaporated. It was replaced by a look of sudden, sharp, dawning respect. He understood. He nodded once, slowly. "Yes, ma'am." He took a half step back, giving me my space. The elevator chimed. Lobby. The doors slid open. The sound was different. The violent, drumming roar of the rain was gone. The squall had passed. A sudden, brilliant, almost painful shaft of post-storm sunlight was lancing through the glass canyon of the atrium. It hit the polished black stone floor, illuminating the wet, dark footprints from the morning's rush hour, making them glitter like scattered diamonds. The light fell across the stone like a fresh coat of lacquer, clean, new. My grandfather pushed his coffee cart out of the elevator. His head was down. His movements were slow, believably tired. He didn't look at me. He just pushed the cart toward the service exit, just another invisible man finishing his day's work. I stepped out onto the sun-drenched floor. No one applauded. No one cheered. The lobby was full of employees, their heads down, rushing to lunch, focused on their own deals, their own presentations. The world hadn't stopped. The building hadn't fallen. It didn't matter. The lie was cut out. The disease was gone. The door was shut. We didn't need applause. I stood in the center of the grand lobby. The sunlight was warm on my face, streaming through the glass, painting the black stone floor in brilliant white. The air was fresh, moved by a light breeze from the revolving doors, carrying the last, faint, acidic traces of the day's coffee. He was waiting. He hadn't left yet. He was by the main service corridor, his cart parked. The out-of-service sign hung neatly on the handle. He was standing there, his cap still low, looking for all the world like a man waiting for his shift to end. But he was watching me. I walked toward him, my steps echoing slightly in the now emptying lobby. The throb in my cheek was just a dull, distant ache, a reminder. He watched me approach. When I was a few feet away, he reached into the pocket of his simple trousers. He pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth. It was an old-fashioned man's handkerchief. Linen, soft from 1,000 washings. He held it out to me. I took it. It was warm from his hand. In the corner, embroidered in a faded navy blue thread, was a single, elegant, looped letter, K. Not for Kira, for Kiki. It had been mine. From a time I couldn't even remember. A time before Sloane. Before all of this. I looked up at him. His eyes, under the shadow of the brim, were clear and sharp. They were not smiling. They were assessing. "Next time, Kiki," he said, his voice low. "Just for me." The raspy barista whisper was gone, replaced by the familiar, firm baritone of my grandfather. "Don't wait for me to call your name to remember who you are." I didn't have a reply for that. The truth of it was too heavy, too absolute. I just looked at the K in my hand. Then I folded it, carefully, and tucked it deep into my jacket pocket, over my heart. I just nodded. Once. That was all he needed. I turned from him. I didn't say goodbye. He didn't say goodbye. I walked away from the service exit, back toward the main elevator bank. Not the executive express, not the glass-walled tourist lift. My elevator, the one for the analysts, the one for the work. I pressed the call button. The doors opened immediately. A silent, waiting mouth. I stepped inside. My fingers, steady now, moved to the panel. I looked at the rows of numbers. 20, 25, 28. I pressed 29. My floor, my department, my work. The light for 29 glowed. The doors, mirrored steel, began to slide shut, wiping the sunlit lobby from my view. They closed, sealing me in the quiet, reflective box. For a second, I was alone with my reflection. The glass showed me a woman with a bruised face and tired eyes. The hair was still pulled back tight. The suit was still rumpled. But the girl from this morning, the one whose voice was small, the one who was terrified of being interrupted, the one who was bracing for a fight she expected to lose, she was gone. The reflection's eyes weren't scared. They weren't waiting. They were just looking forward. The girl whose voice was drowned out was not there anymore. And just before the doors sealed with a final, soft hiss, I heard it, from across the lobby, from the service corridor, a single, sharp, definitive sound. Thump! The sound of a walnut cane hitting a stone floor. A farewell. Coffee is served. Truth, too. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We're a global community here, and I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's connect and share our thoughts on Kira's revenge. If you enjoyed this, please show your support. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you really loved it, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Your support means everything.